Video games, more than any other medium, have a terrible habit of setting up endings that never fully pay off. It could be because the developers wrote themselves into a corner and hit the reboot button, there's a negative reaction to the plot, or logically enough, the game didn't sell enough copies for that initially planned franchise to play out. This can be especially frustrating when you're engaged with a story, buying into the world and its characters, only to realize you'll never get any firm resolution. Gaming has a metaphorical graveyard filled with abandoned storylines and promised sequels, and sometimes the biggest franchises are the most guilty, with complaints from fans essentially being met with shrugs. Because if those numbers don't add up, a publisher just isn't going to greenlight the next project, even if a developer was planning on going there in the first place. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most infuriating unresolved video game cliffhangers. Number 10. The Urgoth in Anthem. A super quick one here, but why the hell did BioWare leave the one cool thing about their story, the idea of an ancient race being behind the world-shifting Anthem itself, to a post-credits scene? Seriously, your big story hook is what is the Anthem, and that could have been the main narrative's driving pull. You've clearly written something for all this, but hey, please come back next time when we can figure out what the hell we were even going for. Chances are BioWare won't even get to make an Anthem 2, but that also might be for the best. Number 9. The Darkness 2. The Darkness was one of the earliest games available for the PS3, a personal favourite and an ambitious, sprawling action game with great characters and tons of style. One of the most memorable aspects was the sweet relationship between main character Jackie and girlfriend Jenny, as the game even gives the player the option to just hang out with her. So when it transpires that she ends up getting executed, it has a hell of a lot of weight. In The Darkness 2, Jackie is haunted by memories of Jenny, and the ending has him travel to hell, it's a long story, to try and rescue her. They're happily reunited for a moment, only for Jenny to be revealed as the host of the Angelus, a mortal enemy of the Darkness. This leaves our heartbroken anti-hero stranded in hell by the Angelus, and he's left screaming in frustration and heartbreak. Despite being a solid game, The Darkness 2 didn't set the charts on fire, and despite ending on a whopper of a cliffhanger, there's virtually no chance of The Darkness 3 ever being made to actually conclude the story. Number 8. The Punisher. Another one of my all-time favorite games, The Punisher was a great third-person action game featuring everyone's favorite grim-faced vigilante. The game also functioned as a semi-sequel to 2004's Punisher movie, with Thomas Jane returning to play Frank Castle and a villain from the movie becoming the new Jigsaw. The game ended with the Punisher finally taking Jigsaw down, but a post-credit scene revealed that his kill-happy ways have enraged the Kingpin, who vowed to take the Punisher down in what would have been the next game. While the Punisher went down a storm and it was well received critically, that potential sequel just never emerged. Information surrounding a Punisher 2 showed that characters like Daredevil, Elektra, and Deadpool would have made appearances, though sadly it never got any further than just the planning stage. Hopefully at this point, with THQ Nordic getting back in the saddle and Volition being in a very good spot, maybe we will eventually see a Punisher 2. Number 7. Clive Barker's Jericho. Clive Barker's Jericho had a lot going for it. A story by a well-renowned horror genius, a rich mythology, and some truly disgusting enemy designs. Where it fell down though was through ham-fisted dialogue and repetitive combat, where blasting constantly respawning enemies kinda just became a chore after a while. Still, it garnered a small fanbase who were keen to see more adventures with the Jericho squad. It's just too bad that we never got any. Jericho follows a team of paranormal soldiers trying to take down the Firstborn, who was God's first attempt at creating a being in his image. The final conflict has them enter a portal to kill it once and for all, which they do appear to manage despite losing a few team members. They swim into a chasm and emerge on the other side, and that's it. Roll credits. It's an annoyingly abrupt conclusion that intentionally leaves a whole bunch of questions unanswered. The most obvious of which being if the Firstborn is actually dead or not. Speaking in 2007, Clive Barker did finally start describing what he would have done for a sequel, saying that it would have included, and I quote, an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean with exactly 666 children in its hold. The game would have also shone a light on the remaining team members, though due to a whole bunch of reasons involving critical reception and assumedly budget, it is highly unlikely that we'll ever get this game. Number 6. The Thing. The game version of John Carpenter's masterpiece had some ambitious game mechanics, but it didn't really have the technology to support them. The Thing pioneered a unique squad mechanic whereby you'd have to trust panicked and possibly infected NPCs with all sorts of weapons. But invariably, this system was pretty easy to master, and supporting characters would thing out at scripted moments regardless. Still, it managed to capture the tone of the movie and even provided an answer for that famously bleak ending. This last-second twist leaves a lot of unanswered questions, like where had he been hiding and how did he survive the end of the movie? These questions would have been answered in a sequel, but when the developer went belly up, the answers did too. Number 5. Dino Crisis 2. Dino Crisis is the great lost franchise of Capcom, though to be fair, they lost it themselves. It was basically Resident Evil with dinosaurs, an irresistible idea for literally any human. Dino Crisis 2 saw a marked increase in arcade-style action at the expense of survival horror, arguably resulting in a better game. The story had heroes Regina and Dylan on a rescue mission to the past, and due to an unbelievably convoluted series of events, the latter discovers that his future self ran a facility there, and the mute girl he's been trying to save is his own daughter. Because video games. After defeating the final boss, they try to escape through a time portal, but Dylan's daughter is trapped under some rubble. Dylan elects to stay with her, and Regina promises to travel back and save them. She escapes, and Dylan and his daughter die when the facility self-destructs. It was a surprisingly emotional cliffhanger to end on, but for some utterly baffling reason, the third game then took place on a spaceship where dino-alien hybrids chased the player instead. The game was so bad it killed the franchise on the spot, and Capcom are yet to revisit it or even address where they most prominently left off. Number 4. Resident Evil Gaiden. Resident Evil is a series definitely guilty of dropping plotlines and characters. Poor Rebecca Chambers just vanished, and just what happened to Wesker resurrecting Steve Burnside. The most glaring omission is from the not particularly beloved Game Boy Color spin-off Resident Evil Gaiden, where Barry Burton and Leon Kennedy are trapped on a zombie-infected ship. The monster they're chasing is a nasty customer with the ability to shapeshift, and the ending has Barry reunited with Leon after apparently defeating the monster once and for all. They escape with another survivor, only for the happy ending to be undercut when it's revealed that Leon has a cut that's bleeding green blood, indicating that the monster killed him and took his place. Of course, not many people played Gaiden, and even fewer liked it, so the game has entered non-canon limbo. The odds of this ending being revisited in any form is unlikely as hell, and if Leon has secretly been a monster this whole time, he's been very discreet about it across all those other sequels. Number 3. 13. Despite a colourful art style and good reviews, 13 just didn't do the numbers to get a sequel off the ground. And that's a pity, because in addition to it being a fun shooter, it ended on an absolute doozy of a twist. After a complicated series of events, an undercover spy codenamed 13 celebrates having uncovered a conspiracy to overthrow the US government by a sinister group called the Double X, who also assassinated the president. After this celebration on a boat party, 13 heads off to find the late president's brother, only to overhear a conversation which confirms that he was behind the whole thing. 13 is then trapped by the brother and his men, and the game ends with the text, "To be continued." However, fans had no such luck. Despite being fondly remembered, we never got to see more adventures from 13, aside from a couple of Canadian TV shows unrelated to the game. Thankfully, Ubisoft are bringing 13 back as a remaster, so maybe this will eventually stimmy up enough sales to finally get a part 2. Number 2. Siphon Filter Logan's Shadow. A game for people who liked Metal Gear Solid but kinda just wanted to shoot everyone in the head instead, Siphon Filter was a solid shooter that let you barbecue people with a taser. The game was a fun blend of action and stealth, but it didn't have the staying power of its rivals, ultimately resulting in one final game on the PSP, despite the final 2 titles receiving critical acclaim. Logan's Shadow ended with lovable Agent Gabe Logan about to retire, after becoming sick of the lies and death involved in the whole spy business. He and his partner enter their base only to find that their teammates are dead, and Gabe is mortally wounded by an assassin. The game ends with his partner trying seemingly in vain to revive him. And that's where Siphon Filter left everything, with its main character bleeding to death and his partner crying over his body. There are no new games coming up, and it just feels like Siphon Filter overall is a product of the past. Number 1. The Legacy of Kain Defiance. Oh god, I love this series, and it just feels plain wrong to exist in a world where there hasn't been a new Legacy of Kain since 2003. And no, I'm not counting Nosgoth. The series was a dense mix of fantasy, horror, and action, featuring 2 of the coolest anti-heroes in gaming, Kain and Raziel. These 2 immortal enemies were finally playable together in the final game, Legacy of Kain Defiance. In order to defeat an Elder God who had been using both of them for its own evil purposes, Raziel decides to sacrifice himself, forcing Kain to kill him so that his soul could power the legendary Soul Reaver sword. Kain then fights the Elder God, but he fails to kill it. Looking over the city, he thanks Raziel for his sacrifice. This is apparently because there was a 6th game in development that would have followed up on the way that Defiance ended, but it was canned early on. A planned reboot was then called Dead Sun, and that was meant to come to the PS3 and Xbox 360, only for that to be canned as well. The chances of a direct continuation of the Legacy of Kain games is pretty grim at this point. Though if it does eventually come back, the sheer amount of time between releases likely means it'll be a full-on reinvention.